Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really difficult and complex subject. We're going to be doing a thorough investigation, a deep dive into the controversy around the alleged actions of Israeli reservists. These are soldiers from the intervention unit Koach 100 or Force 100.
That's right. And specifically, their actions during deployment at the Sde Teiman detention facility.
Yeah, Sde Teiman. It's become this real focal point.
It really has. And look, it feels like an institutional tragedy in many. The source material we're drawing from, it leans heavily on the perspectives of the accused reservists, their defense, their personal accounts.
Right. We need to acknowledge that context up front.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's also interwoven with official military investigation reports and legal documents. So it presents this really agonizing picture. It's not just about finding guilt or innocence in a legal sense.
No, it feels much bigger than that.
It does. It feels like it's about this fundamental breakdown of trust. Trust between these frontline soldiers who were facing arguably the most extreme elements of the enemy.
The Nukba terrorists, specifically.
Exactly. And the judicial system, the military legal system that they expected would, have their backs.
That tension you just described, that's really the core of this whole story, isn't it? Yeah. You've got soldiers describing these operational realities that sound, almost impossible. Dealing daily with individuals they openly describe as less than human, dedicated Nukba fighters. And then suddenly they find themselves arrested, charged with really severe criminal acts, including sexual assault.
It's a shocking turn.
So our mission today really is to unpack all of this. We need to look at the operational demands that created this kind of pressure cooker environment at Sde Teiman. We need to analyze the specific allegations, what exactly they are accused of.
And crucially, trace how this spiraled into a crisis of confidence, particularly focusing on the actions or alleged actions of the Military Advocate General's office, the MAG.
Yeah, the MAG's role becomes central later on.
It does. We're essentially looking at how a democracy tries to perform this incredibly difficult balancing act, right? You need absolute military effectiveness, especially in a volatile combat zone like Gaza post-October 7th.
But at the same time,
you have to adhere absolutely to the rule of law, even when dealing with an enemy accused of horrific atrocities.
And if that balance fails,
the consequences are distinct, legally, psychologically, institutionally. So let's start at the beginning. Let's define this unit, Force 100, and try to understand the environment they were operating.
Okay, so Force 100. Let's really dig. It's crucial to understand, like you said, this wasn't just routine guard duty. What was their specific job? Why that was Sde Teiman?
Right. So Force 100 is designated as an intervention. That's key. Their core function is handling extreme events.
Extreme events. What does that mean in this context?
It means they're the last line of defense inside the wire. They're designed to rapidly suppress and contain major disturbance. Riots, mass escape attempts, hostage situations maybe, anything critical.
And not just inside the Nukba compound.
Potentially outside too, if needed, but primarily focused on those high-risk detention areas. They are the emergency response team for an incredibly volatile situation.
And the nature of the prisoners, the Nukba terrorists, really defines the difficulty of that mission, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That distinction is fundamental to understanding the mindset the reservists describe when they use language like less than human, which is obviously incredibly charged.
Yes, very.
They claim they're referring to the specific ideology they encountered. The ideology of the Nukba units who, as these soldiers stress repeatedly, came to die. They actively sanctify death.
So the soldiers perceive them not as standard prisoners of war, but as something else entirely.
Correct. Not as conventional combatants who might surrender or eventually be released, but as individuals whose primary goal, even in captivity, might be martyrdom, inflicting maximum damage on their captors before dying.
Okay, so that frames every single interaction as a potential life-or-death struggle for the guard. Not just containment, but survival.
That's the perception they convey, yes. And the physical setup at Sde Teiman seems to have only amplified this danger.
What do we know about the conditions there?
Well, the sources describe a single complex holding somewhere between 100 and 120 of these Nukba terrorists or prisoners. That's a large number in one space.
And Force 100 had exclusive access.
That seems to be the case, according to these accounts. A strict access restriction. Almost no one else was allowed into these specific high-risk compounds.
So they're isolated. It's just them and the prisoners.
Essentially, yes. They are the sole face of authority inside that compound, facing a large group they perceive as uniformly hostile, ideologically driven, and extremely...
This brings us to the tactic and the numbers. This part is just hard to fathom. A team of only 10 fighters going into that compound.
10 fighters against 100 to 120 in...
That ratio it's unbelievable.
It demands immediate, overwhelming dominance just to maintain control, doesn't it? To prevent a mass incident. But here's the detail that really stands out, the one that shapes everything. Those 10 fighters enter without fire, no hot weapons.
Wait, seriously, no guns?
According to their accounts, no. They rely exclusively on non-lethal means. Equipment on their gear batons, maybe shields, cuffs, perhaps tear gas or similar tools, but no lethal firearms.
Okay, hold on. You're facing over 100 men who you believe want to kill you and achieve martyrdom.
Uh-huh.
And your primary weapon is a baton.
That's what they describe. And this, they argue, forces a certain kind of approach. It moves the required level of aggression from being, a tactical choice to basically a survival imperative.
It has to be aggressive.
Exactly. This is central to their defense. The work, they stress, requires an aggressive, clear, and unambiguous approach. They say there's simply no room for error.
Because any hesitation,
any perceived delicacy, as they put it, is immediately interpreted as weak. And in that environment, 10 against 120. Weakness isn't just a tactical failure.
It's potentially fatal.
It's an immediate life threat in their. They feel they have milliseconds to establish and maintain absolute control, or they could be overwhelmed.
So the need for what might look like excessive force from the outside is, from their perspective, the bare minimum needed to stay alive and prevent a disaster.
That's the argument. It's an inherently kinetic environment just by design, based on these.
And then you add the psychological provocations.
Right. The soldiers recount constant psychological pressure, inmates actively engaging in what they saw as psychological warfare, making explicit threats.
What kind of threat?
The sources detail really graphic threat. Inmates allegedly saying things like they would stab you and rape you.
Direct threats of lethal violence and sexual violence.
Explicitly directed at the very people trying to maintain order. You have to imagine the cognitive load that facing that kind of hatred, outnumbered 12-1, knowing you don't have a fire.
While simultaneously being expected to adhere to the strictest rules of engagement in military law.
It's an almost impossible bind. And this is where the profile of the reservists themselves becomes important.
Who are these guys?
They're not, 19-year-old conscripts fresh out of basic training. The sources emphasize these are men in their 40s, maybe older, fathers, professionals, people with established lives pulled back into service.
And they see themselves very differently.
Very differently. They fiercely assert, we are the most ethical soldiers that exist. They talk about being motivated by a deep sense of Schlichut.
Schlichut. That word came up in the outline. It's more than just mission, right? Explain that.
It's a weighty term. It implies a mandate, a calling almost, a profound personal mission, often tied to national or even historical. For them, it means they're driven by fundamental value, commitment to protecting their country.
So not just doing a job, but fulfilling a deep ethical obligation.
That's how they frame it. And this self-image, this belief in their own ethical core, is absolutely crucial for understanding their shock and sense of betrayal later when they're arrested.
And they even had visual symbols for this during briefing, the flags.
Yeah, this is a really striking detail, almost poignant given what happened later. They apparently had both the Nukba flag and the Israeli flag present during briefings before going into the comp.
Why both?
The Nukba flag was there as a visceral reminder, they said. A reminder of the enemy they were facing, the ideology that sanctifies death, keep them focused on the threat.
Okay, that makes sense. And the Israeli flag.
That was for the opposite reason. It was a constant reminder, they stressed, that they must not make mistakes.
Why was avoiding mistakes so paramount, tied to their own flag?
Because of the hostages. This was their stated rationale. They felt any ethical lapse on their part, any action that compromised IDF values could directly harm the negotiations or Israel's moral standing needed to bring the hostages home.
Wow. So they're simultaneously pushing themselves towards extreme aggression for survival, while also demanding extreme ethical restraint for the sake of national values and the hostage.
It's an inherent contradiction, a massive psychological pressure. You need to dominate physically, instantly, non-lethal, but you also need to be beyond reproach, ethic.
It sounds like the system almost set them up for failure. You create conditions that demand borderline actions, then hold them to the strictest possible legal standard.
That's certainly how they came to feel, that the operational reality they were forced into wasn't fully acknowledged or accounted for by the legal system that came later. This immense cognitive load, the constant tightrope walk, dominance and restraint. That's the backdrop for the legal drama that erupted.
Okay, so given that environment that Razor's Edge Force 100 was operating on, maybe it's not surprising that legal scrutiny followed. The military reported opening quite a few criminal investigations related to the fighting overall, right?
That's correct. The reports mentioned approximately 70 criminal investigations were open, inspected violations of law during the broader conflict. So the Military Justice Act, likely under significant pressure, both internal and external, to demonstrate accountability.
And the Sde Teiman facility and Force 100's conduct there fell into that umbrella. Part of those 70 investigations.
Yes. The claims regarding detention conditions and the alleged abuse at Sde Teiman were included in that larger investigative effort.
So what were the specific allegations against these reservists? How did it start?
The initial trigger, according to the sources, was a specific Nukba terrorist detained at Sde Teiman. He claimed he was maltreated, abused by the reservists who were guarding the prison.
Maltreat. That could mean a lot of but the actual charge was much more specific and much more severe.
It was. While maltreatment is broad, the specific legal charge brought against these reservists was sodomy sexual assault.
And the sources mentioned it was under non-aggravated circumstances. What does that mean legally? That's a lesson to severity.
Legally, non-aggravated usually means the alleged act wasn't accompanied by other specific factors, like using a weapon during the assault, or kidnap, or causing separate severe bodily harm beyond the assault itself. But let's be clear, it absolutely does not diminish the fundamental gravity of sexual assault charge. It's still a horrific felony act.
And there was apparently video evidence involved.
Yes, the sources state that a corresponding video recording was included as part of the evidence package supporting this charge.
Okay. And the reservists' reaction to this specific, incredibly serious charge?
Complete denial. They firmly asserted that the allegation and the resulting indictment was entirely fabricated. They used that Hebrew word, metriotatum.
Meaning manufactured, cooked up.
Exactly, concocted. They felt the charge was baseless and perhaps motivated by something other than the facts.
And they believed the prosecution wasn't looking at the full picture. They mentioned something called a takir mifsa, an operational debriefing.
Right, the takir mifsa. This is a standard military process. It's a thorough internal review, usually conducted by operational commanders or special, focusing on the tactical execution of a mission. How did it go? What worked? What didn't? What were the challenges?
So less about strict legal lines and more about battlefield reality.
Generally, yes. And the reservists believed that this debriefing, which would have presumably analyzed the 10 versus 120 ratio, the non-lethal constraint, the specific threats they faced, the need for immediate dominance, they believed it contained much more vital context than what the military prosecution ultimately
Or chose to focus on.
Or chose to prioritize. They felt this operational review should have essentially cleared them, or at least explained the actions seen on the video in a way that mitigated criminal intent.
So their argument is basically someone reviewing this purely legally sees abuse, but someone reviewing it operationally sees necessary, albeit harsh, survival tactics.
That seems to be the core disconnect they're pointing. They felt the life or death operational context was lost, ignored, or maybe deliberately sidelined by prosecutors who, they perhaps suspected, were more concerned with legal appearance or external pressure.
But instead of being cleared by this internal review, they were arrested. And the way they describe the arrest itself sounds deeply traumatic.
It does. The manner of the arrest seems to have caused profound shock and humiliation. They talk about being arrested with masks, plant cot pulled over their faces.
Which is usually reserved for
dangerous criminals, flight risks, terrorists, not typically for decorated reservists, fathers in their 40s answering a call-up. They saw it as completely excessive and deliberately degrading.
And they asked that question.
That powerful, simple question, why didn't you call us in for questions? We would have come. Would we run away? It speaks volumes about how they saw themselves versus how they felt them.
Like enemies of the state, almost.
That's the feeling they convey. And the detention conditions afterwards apparently just reinforced that sense of betrayal. One reservist described his first time in military jail. It sounds harrowing.
What did he describe?
Endless questioning, being forced to sleep on a mattress infested with small, disgusting creatures, extreme heat, constant shouting, humiliation. He said it felt designed to break their...
And the uniform. That detail really struck me.
Yes. The uniform, the symbol of their service, their sacrifice, their shlisha, their value. Being forced to wear that same uniform while incarcerated, being treated like a criminal by the very institution it represents.
One reservist called that the biggest humiliation.
It's a complete inversion of everyone.
A total inversion.
Mm-hmm.
The symbol of honor becomes a badge of shame handed to them by their own side. It felt like a message that their sacrifice was not just unappreciated, but actively rejected.
So that shift from being, frontline heroes to alleged felons was instantaneous and incredibly damaging. They also mentioned the time lost, right? Even if acquitted. Yeah, that's a recurring theme. The system, they feel, has already stolen 1 year and 4 months of their lives, regardless of the ultimate legal outcome. The damage to their reputations, families, careers is already...
And they ask, who compensates for that? Who is held accountable for this process?
Exactly. It's this process of being criminalized by their own state, by the military they serve, that really elevates this beyond a standard legal. It becomes about a fundamental rupture in the system itself.
So the moment those arrests happened, the masks, the charges, the Sde Teiman case really exploded. It stopped being just about alleged abuse in one facility and became this major institutional crisis, didn't it?
Absolutely. And the reservists were very clear about how they perceived their role in this crisis. They felt they were being sacrificed.
How so? They didn't just see it as a mistake or a misunderstanding.
No. They explicitly reject the idea that this is just about, say, fabrication of evidence in the narrows, or even a simple blood libel, Alila, against IDF soldiers, though they use that kind of language too.
So what do they say it's about?
They acknowledge the official narrative, the prosecution's case, is that 5 reservists committed horrific, but their narrative is that they are the actual victims here. Victims of a system that was actively looking for a scapegoat.
A scapegoat for what? Why would the system need one, in their view?
Well, based on their accounts and interpretations, they seem to believe it was about external pressure. Intense international scrutiny about the treatment of Palestinian prisoners, especially Nukba captured after October 7th.
And the military justice system needing to show it was taking action.
Exactly. Needing to demonstrate swift, decisive adherence to international law, perhaps to deflect criticism from higher up the chain of command. And these reservists operating in that isolated, high-risk compound, they felt they were the easiest, most convenient korban to offer up.
Okay, so that's their mindset. But the real flashpoint, the thing that seemed to solidify the crisis of trust, wasn't just the indictment itself. It was the handling of that video evidence.
The leaked video. Yes, that became absolutely central. A blurred video related to the alleged abuse somehow found its way into the public domain.
And the reservists were furious about this.
Livid. They accused the system, whoever was responsible, of taking a complex, highly charged situation, deliberately blurring crucial parts of the video.
Why blur it?
Well, their argument is that blurring it allowed the leaker to control the narrative, to suggest something horrific happened without showing the full context, the number of inmates, the lack of firearms, the specific actions leading up to the incident. They called the video's presentation tendential and biased.
Basically weaponizing the footage for maximum negative impact before any trial.
That's how they saw it. A deliberate public manipulation strategy. Leak a suggestive but incomplete video, create public outrage, and essentially convict the soldiers in the court of public opinion before they even get a chance to present their defense, especially the context from that Takir.
And this leak scandal was so serious, it reached the very top of the military legal system. The Chief Military Advocate General, the MAG.
Yeah, Major General Yifat Tomer Yerushalm. She became directly embroiled in the internal investigation about the situation got so heated that she actually requested leave, which the Chief of Staff granted while her role in this leak was clarified.
Having the MAG herself under investigation over a leak in a case her office is prosecuting, that signals a massive internal problem.
It's extraordinary. It points to a potential breakdown of legal ethics and procedures at the highest level.
And then came the bombshell, the admission.
This was the turning point, the moment that, for the reservists and their supporters, confirmed all their worst. Later in the process, the MAG apparently admitted in a formal letter that she had authorized the...
She admitted authorizing what the sources called the tendential.
Yes. That admission landed like an earthquake. It seemed to validate the reservists' core claim that the entire process against them was intentionally tainted mezuhama, poisoned from the start by officials.
Okay, so if the MAG admits she authorized the leak, the reservists must have felt completely vindicated. But it also raises huge questions.
Huge questions. Their defense immediately seized on it. Their argument became, wait a minute, if the MAG knew she authorized this leak all along, something we suspected and fought to prove, then why?
Why what?
Why put us through hell? Why force us to petition the High Court of Justice just to get this information out? Why subject us to months of public condemnation based on a leak you authored? Why the endless legal maneuvering if the truth about the leak's origin was known at the top?
They saw it as proof of systemic bad faith.
Absolutely. They argued it demonstrated a deliberate strategy to grind them down, drain their resources, destroy their morale, possibly hoping they'd just give up or accept a plea deal.
And this admission immediately threw a spotlight on the whole issue of conflicts of interest within the military justice system.
Right, because now the question was, who investigates the MAG for authorizing this potentially illegal or unethical? And this is where it becomes, frankly, almost Kafka-esque.
What happened?
The deputy MAG, her second in command, was asked to conduct a review. Not even a full criminal investigation, which has more teeth, but a review.
The deputy reviews his own boss.
Exactly. And when pressed on the blatant conflict of interest inherent in that situation, the deputy MAG reportedly claimed there was no conflict of interest.
I mean, that's just not credible on its face, is it? How can there be no conflict when you're investigating the person who determines your career trajectory?
Precisely. And it wasn't just the reservists pointing this out. Politicians, journalists, commentators from both the right and the left were apparently aghast. They called it absurd.
It seems self-evident.
It does. The perception rightly or wrongly, was that the system was circling the wagons, prioritizing protecting its own leadership over getting to the truth. It suggested, to the critics, that the deputy mag was inevitably going to clear his boss, regardless of the fact, a transparent act of bad.
So for the reservists, the alleged fabrication wasn't just the initial charge of sodomy. It was the entire system's response, the leak, the internal review. It all felt like part of the same manipulation.
They absolutely connected the dots. They felt the same lack of integrity they perceived, and the handling of the leak must also permeate the underlying indictment. They felt the system was trying to turn them into something they weren't: abusers, criminals, and was willing to bend or break its own do it. This institutional crisis became incredibly personal. Identity, their service, their faith in the very country fought.
When you feel the system you risk your life for is actively working against, trying to, as they put it, sew a case again, the psychological damage must be immense. The sources really paint a grim picture of the human cost here.
It's devastating and multi-layered. They talk about battling PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's crucial to understand this isn't just from the combat, from facing the...
It's
compounded trauma. It's the horror of the operational reality, mixed with the profound shock, the humiliation, the feeling of abandonment from their own side, the legal pressure. The trauma seems rooted in the betrayal of their core beliefs about their service country.
And it affects their daily lives profoundly.
Completely. They describe being totally dysfunctional, not sleeping, or only sleeping with pills, living in a state of constant crisis, unable to function properly at home with their families and their jobs.
One reservist described his home.
Yeah, that was particularly hard. He described himself as essentially disconnected within his, sleeping on the sofa, retreating to his room, unable to be the husband or father he was before.
And the impact on the children, that must be considered too. They have to process their father being arrested, accused of terrible things.
It's a huge, often unspoken part of the trauma. That same reservist talked about the turmoil of his kid, his eldest, old enough to grasp the shame, the news headline, and his younger child.
What about the younger one?
He mentioned the younger one was used to getting video calls from daddy every single night while he was on reserve duty. Then suddenly, nothing. Complete silence. Because, as he put it, daddy is in jail for nothing.
Wow.
That sudden, unexplained absence, coupled with the later understanding of why, being accused of crimes like it creates this secondary trauma within the family. The system didn't just arrest 5 soldiers, it deeply wounded 5 families.
So given all this suffering, what are they actually asking for? Is it about compensation, recognition?
It's simpler and more fundamental than that. They state it very clearly. I do not want a medal. I only want justice.
Zedek.
Justice meaning a fair trial.
A fair process.
Yep.
One free from the external noise, as they call it, the leaks, the media manipulation, the public condemnation before the facts are heard. They feel like they were subjected to mishpat sada.
Field justice, like a summary execution almost.
A trial by media, orchestrated by the very authorities who should have been safeguarding their rights. They felt completely silenced and prejudged. There was that quote that really captured this sense of abandonment.
Instead of connection, we got accusations. Instead of thanks, we got silence. That just perfectly encapsulates the perceived breakdown of the social contract.
The contract between the citizen soldier and the state.
Exact. They performed an incredibly difficult, dangerous, and frankly ugly task, believing the state owed them given backing, support, protection, the benefit of the doubt. And instead, they felt they received only accusations and humiliation. This feeling of being discarded by the nation they were protecting, that's possibly the deepest wound.
And yet, despite all of this, the jail, the accusations, the uniform humiliation, they still seem to cling to the meaning of that uniform.
It's a fascinating psychological element, isn't it? It seems the uniform, for them, represents the ideal of service, the higher value of national commitment, an ideal that transcends the flaws or even the alleged corruption of the current judicial bureaucracy.
So wearing it again isn't just about clearing their names.
For one reservist, being able to wear that uniform again with honor is framed as his great victory. A great privilege. It's an act of defiance, reclaiming their identity, scrubbing off the stigma this tried to impose.
This deep, almost stubborn commitment to the ideal of service is really hammered home by that one incredibly personal story. We have to spend...
Yes, this anecdote feels central to understanding their underlying motivation. One of the reservists shared his family history. He's the son of a victim of a terrorist attack.
His father and uncle were murdered.
Correct. His entire life is shattered by that violence, that loss. And despite his mother's understandable fear and resistance, he fought incredibly hard for said just to be allowed to join a combat.
So his service isn't just patriotism. It's deeply personal, rooted in family tragedy and a desire to prevent it from happening to others.
This is a man whose commitment to fighting Israel's enemies comes from the deepest possible.
Okay, so here's the crux. This man endures the horrors of combat, the specific pressures of Sde Teiman, the shock of arrest, the humiliation, the PTSD, the feeling of systemic betrayal. And then he's asked about his own son.
his 10-year-old son, would he still advise him to follow in his footsteps, to join a combat unit?
And his answer is?
Yes. He confirms he would still tell his son to enlist in a combat.
How does he justify that after everything he's been through?
His justification is, well, it's almost heartbreaking. He says he would tell his son this because he, the father, believes he acted according to the law, and therefore the son must also trust the system, trust the law, and believe that everything's okay.
That sounds less like confidence and more like a desperate hope, a prayer that the system should work, even if it failed him.
It feels like a profound, maybe even tragic act of faith in the ideal of the rule of law, despite his own traumatic the application of that law. He clings to the principle, even after feeling personally victimized by the process.
So the message to his son is, sir, because the values are right, and we have to believe the system will eventually uphold those values, even if it seems broken now.
That seems to be it. It suggests the next generation's service depends not on the system being perfect, but on the enduring importance of the foundational value and a hope, perhaps a fragile hope, that the system can and will be correct.
And that hope, that faith, seems to be what's sustaining them through this ordeal.
It appears so. They talk about drawing strength from faith, from a belief that ultimately the truth emerges step by step. The mag's admission about the leak, for instance, they saw as proof of this evidence that light eventually does penetrate the dark.
And they have this final image of victory, don't they? What they want at the end of all this.
Yeah, a very powerful visual. Their ultimate victory, they say, is the ability to finally remove the mask the plan caught they were arrested, stand there, unmasked, and declare, the ones who need to wear these masks are not us. Look at our face.
It's a demand for transparency, for vindication, for their honor to be restored, for the world to see them not as the criminals the system tried to make them, but as the ethical, dedicated soldiers they believe themselves to be. #tag outro. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left holding these two really stark, opposing realities in tension, aren't we? On one hand, you have the operational situation described by Force 100.
Right. 10 men, no firearm, facing over 100 prisoners they perceive as ideologically committed to killing, operating under constant threat in an almost untenable...
And on the other hand, you have the absolute non-negotiable requirement for democracy to uphold the rule of law. You have to hold your forces accountable even when they're dealing with enemies accused of the worst atrocity. Otherwise, you risk losing your own moral compass.
Exactly. And this Koach timing controversy is a brutal case study in how quickly allegations of abuse against individual tasks. It became less about the specific incident and more about the conduct of the agents themselves, the prosecution, the MAG's office, internal review process.
The integrity of the system itself went on trial.
It did. And the core takeaway, I think, circles back to that fundamental demand from the expectation of given backing, the belief that the state and the military owe support, legal and moral, to those operating under such extreme, almost impossible pressure.
And when the highest legal authority in the military admits to authorizing a tendential leak against those same soldiers.
That fundamentally undermines the foundation of that trust. It validates, in the soldiers' eyes, their narrative of being framed, of being scapegoated. The crisis wasn't just the initial allegation. The deeper crisis became the perception of betrayal.
It really highlights the devastating cost when that internal trust, that bond between the soldier and the system, is shattered, especially when the system's actions seem geared towards managing external appearances rather than ensuring internal justice.
Absolutely.
So this whole story leaves us, and you, the listener, with a really difficult, enduring question, doesn't it? How does a democracy ethically navigate the extreme pressures created by enemies who seem to operate entirely outside moral boundaries?
How do you balance that need for aggressive deterrence, for sheer survival, with the absolute imperative to uphold your own legal and ethical standards, especially when those standards are tested by unimaginable enemy action?
And what happens to the system? What happens to the soldiers when the very fighters required to uphold that law feel that the law itself is being twisted and weaponized against them?
And perhaps bringing it back to that father's story, when a soldier whose family has already paid the ultimate price feels betrayed by the serve, yet still tells his son to follow him. What fundamental flaw does that fix to finally become worthy of that incredible...
It suggests the future health of national service itself might depend on addressing the failures or perceived failures exposed by Sde Teiman.
A profound challenge indeed.
Something deeply challenging to think about as this case to one. Thank you for joining us, Dies, today.